Welcome back to Crux Stationalis. This is the sixth episode of the podcast edition where we explore the Roman station churches, the most ancient churches of Rome. I'm Jacob Stein, your host, and today on the first Sunday of Lent, we visit the Mater et Caput, the mother and head of all the churches of the world, St. John Lateran. More than just the Cathedral of Rome, the Lateran Basilica is home to the most venerated relics in Christendom, the skulls of Saints Peter and Paul, housed above its high altar. Let's explore the Roman Station Church, the Cathedral of Rome, on this first Sunday of Lent. The Lateran Basilica is the oldest and highest ranking of Rome's four major basilicas. Originally built by Emperor Constantine in the early 4th century, 324 is the year of its consecration, meaning we have celebrated in 2024 the 1700th anniversary of the consecration of the Cathedral of Rome. St. John Lateran has been the center of papal authority for over a millennium. 1700 years, almost 2 millennia. But within its high altar lies something even more ancient, a direct connection to the two apostles who first brought the gospel to Rome. The skulls of Saints Peter and Paul are enshrined in two silver reliquary busts, kept within the magnificent ciborium above the high altar. But their journey to the Lateran was a long one, stretching back to the early centuries of the Church. Before arriving at the Lateran, these relics were venerated in the catacombs of St. Sebastian along the Appian Way. In fact, those catacombs were originally called the Memoria Apostolorum, the memorial of the apostles, because the relics of Peter and Paul were once kept there. Early Christians, fearing persecution, sought to protect the remains of Saints Peter and Paul and temporarily placed them in a more hidden location. By the early Middle Ages, the skulls of the apostles were transferred to the Sancta Sanctorum, which sits directly in front of the Lateran. It was the Pope's private chapel in the Lateran Palace, where the most sacred relics of Christendom were safeguarded for centuries. It wasn't until the 18th century that the holy stairs that we know and we so love to climb up on our knees in honor of our Lord's Passion, it wasn't until the 18th century that they were made, that it was a public site of visitation for pilgrims. Just a little fact. In 1370, during the Avignon papacy, Pope Urban V had the relics solemnly enshrined in the Lateran's high altar. So the timeline is this. After their respective martyrdoms under Emperor Nero, circa 64 to 67 AD, the bodies of Saints Peter and Paul were buried separately. Peter on the Vatican Hill and Paul along the Via Ostiense. And therefore we have the basilicas of Saints Peter in the Vatican and St. Paul's outside the walls. We're familiar with these as Roman station churches. It was then during the mid-3rd century, amid renewed persecution under Emperor Valerian around the year 258 AD, Christians feared the desecration of the remains of these two prince apostles, the two principal patrons of the Church of Rome. In order to protect them, the relics were transferred temporarily to the catacombs of St. Sebastian on the Appian Way, as already mentioned, the Memoria Apostolorum. Further, by the early 4th century, Emperor Constantine built basilicas over both original tombs, the old St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican and St. Paul's outside the walls. Quite a small little basilica was built in St. Paul's outside the walls. We can see even the original apse which faces the other direction than the present basilica when we visit the tomb of St. Paul. However, the skulls of Peter and Paul were later separated from the rest of the relics and placed in the Sancta Sanctorum, the chapel which sits above the Holy Stairs in Rome, right across the street from St. John Lateran. This was the Pope's private chapel in the Lateran. This was likely in the 9th century under Pope Sergius II, between the years 844 and 847 AD. And then finally, as mentioned before, in 1370, during the Avignon papacy, Pope Urban V had the relics solemnly enshrined in the Lateran's high altar. To mark their presence, a stunning Gothic ciborium was commissioned in 1367 by Giovanni di Stefano. This canopy, supported by 4 marble columns, now houses the reliquary busts of the 2 great apostles. Here, above the very altar where the Pope traditionally celebrates Mass, the relics remind us of the unbroken link between Peter, Paul, and the Church's foundation in Rome. The Lateran's Basilica inscription boldly proclaims this: Omnium orbis et orbis ecclesiarum mater et caput, the mother and head of all the churches of the city and of the world. And indeed, within its sanctuary, the very bones of Peter and Paul stand as silent witness to this claim. Therefore, today, on the first Sunday of Lent, the Church's Lenten pilgrimage brings us here to this holy site to visit the relics of these 2 Prince Apostles, these 2 martyrs of Rome, Saints Peter and Paul. In the early centuries, the Pope himself would gather the faithful here to mark these days of fasting, leading a solemn procession from the Lateran Palace. So as we continue on in this penitential season, we stand before the relics of the apostles who gave their lives for Christ. Their presence above the high altar reminds us of the call to perseverance, to faithfulness, and to the journey we all must take, not only in the season of Lent, but throughout our whole Christian lives. So if you ever have the opportunity to visit the Lateran Basilica, take a moment before the high altar, look up at the ciborium, and recall that beneath its canopy rest the skulls of the 2 men who laid the foundation of the Church in Rome. And as you stand there, remember the words of St. Paul: I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. May we also do the same. Not only do I hope that you can visit it in person one day, but if you'd like to visit the Basilica of St. John Lateran in a virtual manner, don't forget to go into the description of the podcast and find the video tour that I have on Crux Stationalis. And also, just a recommendation, I know it's the first days of Lent still. If you need spiritual reading, at the end of the YouTube video, and I'll link it also in the video in the description of the podcast, there's a link to this beautiful book of meditations, 31 days of meditations on the Passion of our Lord. Sometimes when I use this book for my mental prayer, I read a sentence and I'm satisfied for 30 minutes, 45 minutes. That's how powerful these meditations are. They were written for young Passionists in the mid-1800s. So it's meant to keep the Passion, the memory of the Passion in your heart. And how necessary is that during this season of Lent. So I thank you for joining me on this episode of Crux Stationalis. If you're enjoying the podcast, be sure to subscribe and share it with fellow virtual pilgrims. And then you can also find more content on our website, romanstationchurch.com, and our YouTube channel, Crux Stationalis. Until next time, tomorrow, may the apostles Peter and Paul intercede for us. And may your Lenten journey bring you ever closer to Christ. God bless you, and I will hear you tomorrow. You'll hear me on the podcast.
Oh